Time is just gone 7 minutes past 8 as we continue with tonight's edition of Talk with Inequality right here on Salam Media. And the second half of the broadcast this evening is going to be focused on South Africa, on the ICJ case, but more importantly, looking at the diplomatic implications for South Africa. How does this ICJ case affect South Africa? We've seen the world react to South Africa, many in support of South Africa. We've also had those that were not happy about South Africa taking this case to the ICJ. But again, we are in a global village, and there are certainly global consequences, global implications. And South Africa standing diplomatically right across the entire world. Now, we've assembled a wonderful panel this evening. We've got Professor Rasigan Maharaj, activist scholar, Chief Director of the Institute for Economic Research on Innovation at the China University of Technology. We've got Wesam, Ahmad, Head of Center for Applied International Law at Al-Haq, and Dr. Shahd Hammouri, lecturer at the Kent Law School. Now, we are just waiting for the guests to come on. We see all of them. To all of you, thank you very much. We do appreciate you taking time out. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, Rasigan Maharaj, to start off with you, Prof. And obviously, South Africa is under the radar. It is in the spotlight for the reasons, as far as the ICJ is concerned, more so than ever it has been in recent times. And just looking at how this has impacted on South Africa right across the world in terms of how South Africa is seen, South Africa is viewed.
So I think it's very important. Thanks very much, and greetings to all of the colleagues as well that are joining us on this discussion. You know, it's important, I think, for us to just catch up a bit with some basic statistics about who we are that constitute this world that we occupy at present. There are approximately 8 billion of us that are considered human beings, of whom 60 million live in South Africa, and 5.3 million constitute the Palestinian diaspora. So if we look at it in percentage terms, the Palestinian peoples, as they are scattered around the world, constitute 0.07% of the world's population. South Africa only constitutes 0.75% of this 8 billion in total. So I think it's important recognizing immediately, in terms of this inequitable dimension, that it is a small voice that is actually speaking on behalf of a large majority. And this is very important for us to actually get into who constitutes the global majority and how their views are represented through institutions. Much of what we are engaged with about today, especially when we mention the International Court, etc., relates to structures that have been established largely after the Second World War. To a large extent, these institutions are now geriatric, almost approaching 70 years in age. And as a consequence, we really need to be asking ourselves whether they are appropriate institutions for our current circumstances. And the genocide being perpetuated in West Asia, and in particular against the peoples of Palestine, exhibits this most clearly in terms of where harm is being delivered and who actually is constituting this attack on humanity itself.
Yes, thank you for that. And just to bring Dr. Shahd Hammouri into the discussion. Now, it is clear that, we've seen the international reaction to South Africa, to the ICJ case, to the case that they had brought to the International Court of Justice. And also, we've seen the reaction when the ruling was actually given by the judges. And we've seen international reaction in more ways than one, where we've seen this red line that has been drawn in many respects. We've seen those that have supported South Africa. We've also seen those that have been critical of South Africa. But clearly this means a lot internationally, not only from a legal perspective, but also from a diplomatic perspective. This could be a major game changer, Dr. Shahd.
Yes, thank you for that question. Just to begin with, I have to ascertain, and as pointed by the people of Palestine, the move to take the case forward by South Africa was considered to be a move of bravery that will historically go down as at the moment when South Africa held the voice of the Global South. As kindly noted by my colleague, the points that were made by South Africa are representative of a position that is quite shared by popular people all across the world, not only in the global south, but also in the places in the global north as well. But as we know that governments don't represent their people in a lot of spaces, and international law is a very reductive space to comprehend that. What South Africa did was a very important attempt to try to get the sound of justice over the sound of power. And by that, of course, it shook the premises of the power dynamics in the world we live in and the status quo of the world we live in. What South Africa did went against the tide that both Israel and the US and the economically dominating powers of the world were trying to push for. However, what these powers are forgetting is that the world is changing, and no power that has ever taken the stage has ever managed to keep that space for itself. And as we can see, there's a huge shift economically and politically, and perhaps that was in the background discussion in relation to what could possibly be the diplomatic repercussions of this, because South Africa is actually privileged in its capacity in some senses, in ways that other states of the global south are not. So that positioning specifically allowed it to take that brave decision to represent states of the global south in such a strong space. While the state of South Africa in this case made some enemies, however, these enemies are not in their totality because corporations will not be thinking on the same parameters as states in the global north. However, it also made a lot of new friends, a lot of new people who now recognize and affiliate with South Africa as the friend and a representative of their voice. The images that you saw come out in Palestine are simply heartfelt in relation to how far you could see people reacting and kind of rekindling with a voice of this global south that hasn't been alive since the 1970s. So I believe it's a process of making new friends, diplomatically speaking and morally speaking.
Yes, and also Wesam Ahmad out in Ramallah, we've seen, in fact, on day one, when South Africa had presented its case to the ICJ, we've seen the celebration in the West Bank, in particular, Mandela Square. We see the South African flag flying alongside the Palestinian flag. And again, looking at this case of South Africa, clearly it has ruffled quite a few feathers, particularly with regard to the West, South Africa's Western trading partners, but also in terms of boosting the country standing as a champion of the downtrodden in the global South?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's an honor to be here with my fellow panelists. I think it's only fitting that South Africa has made this move because I think it's important to see what is happening in Palestine in a broader historical context. And the situation in Palestine has always been a microcosm of global injustice, and the legacies of colonialism that are felt across many parts of the world, including South Africa, are manifested in a contemporary manner here in Palestine. And this shared, intertwined history of our struggle, it's only natural that it comes together at a time, unfortunately, when a lot of blood has been shed. But sometimes these are the moments in history where there's a tipping point and a shift in the global situation, in the understanding of where we are as humanity, how far have we progressed in terms of the regulation of our society in an international sense. And I think when we look at the intertwined histories of South Africa and Palestine, a lot of people are looking at the shared struggle of apartheid. But I think it's important to step back a little bit further than that even, and to to see the broader colonial project that has been imposed on Africa and the Middle East, and see those connections in parallel as a joint historical struggle. And I want to remind people of a quote from the diaries of Theodore Herzl when he requested that Cecil Rhodes support the Zionist project in Palestine. And he says, I quote, "You're being invited to help make history. That cannot frighten you, nor will you laugh at it. It is not in your accustomed line. It doesn't involve Africa, but a piece of Asia Minor. Not Englishmen, but Jews. Had this been on your path, you would have done it by now. How then do I happen to turn to you, since this is out of the way of the matter for you? How indeed? Because it is something colonial." And we remember that Cecil Rhodes had a vision of the Cape Town to Cairo connection, and this broader sort of imperial ambition and the colonial manifestations that we have seen in Africa, we see in the Palestinian context. And today, that international system of the rules-based order that has been developed over time to regulate this continued colonial project is now being tested. And as you said, we have pushed red lines, and South Africa has taken this very brave decision to challenge the international system and hold it to account, because it isn't only Israel that is on trial. It is this international system and the facade that international law is and human rights are universal and applied to all. Well, South Africa has taken that courageous step and given us an example of what happens when a state has the political will to push things forward. Now it's up to the rest of us to carry the torch forward.
Yes, and I think what you're saying is absolutely important and crucial as well. And Rasigan, just following up from what Wesam Ahmad is saying, talking about challenging the international system. And I heard quite an interesting comment talking about the West, preaching to the world, preaching about human rights, preaching about democracy, preaching about the rule of law. And it's taken a country from the southernmost tip of Africa, it's taken an African country to challenge this narrative. And just looking at it from an African perspective, a South African perspective, this was a huge gamble that South African has taken, or has taken. You know, how big a gamble was this, and is this likely to pay off?
So thanks very much as well, Inayat. And as Wesam has already outlined, and Shahd as well, it's important we link ourselves into this history and understand how it's playing itself out. So while South Africa's decision to proceed with the case to prosecute the Israeli occupation force through the International Court, it's important that the popular sentiment was already in support of the peoples of Palestine. And I link across to a statement just made right now. We are following through on campaigns started by the young people of South Africa. Amongst the slogans, when students argued for free, universal, high-quality education in South Africa, was "Rhodes must fall." What they meant by that was the institutional architecture established through the imperial integration into world systems. I think also, colleagues, we need to be quite careful how we use the word rule-based system. And increasingly, what we see is evidence of rules-biased systems. In other words, where the rules serve the requirements of exploitation or expropriation, then those rules stand. Where those rules are challenged on the basis of the inequalities that they generate, then we see the force being deployed against us. So I think, as the colleagues have correctly pointed out, this remains critically important. And as others are arguing, this does offer us a vista to think about the future. And it's important that, especially as we think about that future, we halt the activity that's leading to the continuation of the deaths, of the fatalities, of the destruction being played down. And importantly in that as well, this world system that we talk about today is increasingly generating distrust in institutions due to what people experience. The systems that are in place and the institutional forms through which they are represented merely serve, like my esteemed colleagues have raised, to either reproduce the inequalities or to extend the grasp of the global north over the global south. And I pick on the point that Shahd has raised earlier as well. When I speak about this, I mean the collective West as represented through their political systems. And we know increasingly there is a gap, democratic deficit between the peoples of those territories and the state systems that represent them as well. So to that extent, I really hope what we are seeing emerging, as the colleagues point out, is a global mobilization of the peoples of the planet against the systems that hold us and perpetuate the bondage that we are locked into. And this is quite core to South Africa's own objectives. As colleagues well know, it was Nelson Mandela who had famously argued that the freedom of the peoples of Palestine cannot be separated from the freedoms of the rest of us. There cannot be 8 billion people minus 5.3 billion when we do counting. So it's absolutely critically important that we take these forward. Well, you've also pointed to some dangers. Sorry.
No, okay, continue. Sorry. Carry on, Prof.
Yeah. So I was pointing to, often we see as the dangers coming through economic sanctions and other forms. I really want us also to encourage a view. As 8 billion people, it cannot be that the global majority continues to serve and create conditions of living, states of existence for a golden billion that enjoy the benefits of the integration that we see as world systems today. For the 7 billion of us, it's abject poverty and scraping a living together. So as we emerge from the conflict itself and hopefully through this make a stronger statement for all of us participating in determining our futures, that we don't allow the forms in which we've been entrapped through indebtedness. I'm sorry, I have to point to an advert I heard while we were waiting for this. We cannot be investing in gold as the solution to our problems. We have to change the system that forces us as human beings to look at a shiny mineral that we dig out of the ground as our salvation. It must be ourselves.
Yes, thank you for that, Prof. And also, Dr. Shahd, I just want to talk about this gamble. Now, obviously, South Africa has gambled in more ways than one, politically, legally, economically as well, they've gambled. And just, I've seen your area of expertise, the research that you've done, the interest that you've got in public international law and also international economic law. And just against, all these gambles that South Africa may have taken, just to look at South Africa and how is this likely to play out? Because like I mentioned, we are in a global village. We've seen South Africa holding certain positions in the past. There were certain threats we've got from the likes of the United Nations. South Africa, obviously, economically, not doing very, very well. And of course, obviously reliant on the global economy to keep South Africa going as well. And we need to maintain that relationship.
Thank you for that question. So to begin with, I think what Israel was trying to push for was politics of fear more than really politics of reality. And you can see that in the narrative that is sold by Israel at almost every second, and the narrative that is sold by the US as well. The reality is that the position that they're pushing for, and that is the position that is against South Africa, is inherently against, even by now, Western liberal standards of international law. So it's not that South Africa actually took a position that is quite very radical, as much as it's the only logical position. The one who is in this equation going to be ostracized from the international community is inevitably going to be Israel and the US following it, rather than South Africa. As per direct economic repercussions, as we saw, states of the global north are in a dire state of political maneuvering, and they don't have a lot of tools to play, because the tools that they have would require some level of legitimacy, and what they're talking about lacks complete logic. And of course, we saw that with a very desperate attempt to cut off funds of UNRWA. So in terms of economic repercussions, I would doubt that these would be much more than simply Israeli investors themselves taking a step back from the South African economy. But I would also say that the dynamics of dependency here and dependency on the South African economy in terms of what it supplies to the international economy, it doesn't allow the investors that much space of reckoning, I believe. I'm not the biggest expert in South African economy, but I don't believe that there, in the sense of the meta sense of international economic law, there wouldn't be repercussions, because what South Africa specifically did not go against that system and is actually translatable within that system. And taking retaliatory measures on that would only be individual acts by individual investors who have a very much pro-Zionist agenda. And if I may say, actually, it falls within South Africa's duty in terms of state responsibility to divest from investments that are affiliated with Zionist investors. So even if that leads to some economic repercussions, which I don't believe would be that much, it would actually mean that South Africa is, in this case, in line with its international legal obligations of divesting from any investments that could possibly feed into the Israeli economy in facilitating not only the grave illegality of the genocide at hand, but the grave illegality of the occupation as a whole, which is the reason for systematic economic harm done to the Palestinian people. Of course, the application of the principles of which I speak remains in an idealist space in international law. As we see, the international legal system sees Israel in a very exceptionalist sense, and in a sense where even the rules that we think should apply to everyone are mutated, and even the realities that we speak of are mutated in order to establish that space of impunity. If the least we could say here in this case is that with the move of South Africa is actually asking the world to remove that exceptionalist space for Israel. And if some investors decide to bully South Africa for partaking in that, then I would say that, again, it would most likely then win the hearts of possibly other investors who we hope would have an outlook that is more in line with international standards, and hopefully other states would take in the same push. And we are hoping that Latin American states would also be taking the same movement now towards divestment from any investments that would be feeding into the Israeli economy. So actually that alienation of the Israeli economy would be taken up collectively, we hope, step by step.
Yes, Wesam, Ahmad, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around international law being supreme, the application of international law in terms of equality to everyone. And the reason why I am saying this is we've seen what Palestine has done. We've seen what Gaza has done. It has exposed the hypocrisy to a large extent of international law. And the South African case that was brought to the ICJ has actually affirmed this narrative of hypocrisy of international law. And also at the same time, looking at, where South Africa or what Gaza has actually done. And many hold the view that Gaza has got the potential of changing the narrative, but also defining a new world order. And particularly looking at how international law is looked at. And I just needed your thoughts in terms of this new world order and the potential of this major game changer and how international law is seen throughout the world.
Yes, I think, unfortunately, the blood spilled in Gaza will contribute to the development of a new world order and the international system as it is and as it's been marketed to much of the world, that it serves the interests of all in an equitable manner has been exposed to be a facade. And it is this this realization that I think will lead to the changes that much of the world wants to see realized, because it's clear that there is an inequitable distribution of power, of wealth, and the law in its spirit as it's written sounds very good, but we have to remember that the law is a social construct, and when we are talking about international law, it is a reflection of the power balance within society at an international level. And so it's very clear when we see the attempts to apply international law to those that don't have power, that it fails to meet their needs, especially if it is going to hurt the interests of those that are in power. And this asymmetrical power balance plays out on many levels, where Palestinians seek international law and the mechanisms that have been created to enforce it as the tools available to it to push through these legal mechanisms. Israel, on the other hand, because it has the power to do so, it serves as judge, jury, and executioner and has no regard for that international system. That exception that Israel is enjoying in terms of impunity, and that exceptionalism that Palestinians are suffering from the lack of application of international law and its enforcement, over time are going, and we are seeing, undermine the integrity of the system as a whole, because the relative equilibrium that international law tries to maintain supports this current power balance, this structure of inequality, and that relative power balance, that relative equilibrium over time gets strained further and further, eventually leading to a system change that naturally seeks a more optimal equilibrium.
Yes, thank you for that, Wesam. And also to bring Professor Rasigan back into the discussion. Prof, I read a very interesting comment, and this is by an academic here in South Africa, Professor Stephen Friedman, who is the director for South Africa Center for Study of Democracy. And I'd like to quote this because, and I'd like your comment on this as well, where he said that if you're going to start punishing South Africa for going to the International Court of Justice, then you're going to have to start punishing a lot of other African countries for supporting the Palestinians. Now, we know that there is this divide between the global north, there is a divide with the global south as well. And at the same time, there is this huge scramble for Africa. China is here, Russia is here, the Americans are here, the Europeans are here. Everybody is scrambling for Africa. And the question is, can the global north or the powers that be in the global north afford to punish South Africa?
So I think the moot point about whether they can afford is based on their calculations in it, as you know. And the way in which they make their calculations, as we are finding it, sometimes defies the logic that us as rational human beings try to understand. Yeah, something quite important in that. And you're absolutely correct. The future of the world lies in this continent purely in terms of demographics and age. It's an objective fact. At the same time, the meeting that took place in Uganda just a week or so ago of the non-aligned movement, now with the entry of South Sudan as the latest member, brings to a total of what the non-aligned movement represents as 80% of the world's population. So it's quite important in terms of us, notwithstanding our economic minority status, that we do claim our majority status as humanity. The object of the economy is meant to serve the purposes of humankind. Where we've ended up at this stage of capitalist development is humankind being forced to conform in to what capital demands of it. So I really like what the colleagues are also saying. I absolutely remain absolutely astounded at the lives that are lost, at the blood that's being forced out of people at the moment, all to expose the hypocrisy of a world system that is not serving us. And at the same time, through these actions, South Africa's action, the non-aligned movement supporting South Africa's action as well, shows that the legitimacy attributed to the global North, the collective West, more specifically its armed wing, NATO, etc., all of these have been brought into question. It cannot be that we move forward with such asymmetries continuing to reproduce themselves, as Professor Ahmad has raised as well. It's really important, if we really want a world system that works for all, that the multipolarity that we see emerging now is enhanced through our actions. It must be a world system that caters for us, because we have much more serious challenges. And that's the point that you're also raising about how some may call a scramble for Africa. At the same time, as the challenges of decolonization continue, we must not forget we still have held under bondage the Sawari People's Republic and its colonial occupation by Morocco. At the same time, we must remember epistemicide continues. In other words, indigenous and traditional ways of seeing the world are continuously being removed and it being replaced by canons established largely by Western Europe and North America. Yeah? Ecocide is facing us as climate change advances rapidly, and now we see the elements of genocide. All of these things tie into a world system that cannot continue, that is failing to reproduce itself, hence the violence that all of us are experiencing. And here, I really would encourage all of us, those subscribed to this channel, as well as all of us that constitute the world systems, to start thinking beyond. We have to stop this violence. It isn't a question of us just looking at these, and I think the words being used are provisional measures. Provisional measures, that's what Naledi Pandor said today. We must look to permanent solutions to these crises. I mentioned the age of the UN institutions because it's the same age also as the formal occupation of the space currently called Israel and Palestine. And it's really important that we push back against these. They cannot continue to be enclaves in a future that will remain uncertain, remain unbalanced, and therefore a threat to all of us. It's an opportunity, Mr. Wadi, and I really hope we can embrace this. That's how we lend succor to the martyrs who have given their lives for us to have this discussion as well.
Yes, very true, Professor. And in fact, I was in Cape Town not long ago where I met with the Minister of International Relations, and she also spoke about reforming the United Nations, and she felt very, very strongly about that. But coming back to you, Dr. Shahd, now, while a lot of focus has been on this genocidal Zionist state of Israel, and we're talking about accountability, we're talking about accountability at a state level, at a government level, but one cannot lose sight of accountability of corporates in war, because the focus at this point in time is on the politicians, on the leadership, on the Bidens, on the Sunaks in the UK, on Netanyahu. But one must also look at the corporates, because many of these leaders serve the interests of corporates, and corporate accountability in war is absolutely critical. It's crucial.
Thank you for that question. So it's a very big one, an important one. We've been working for years on to push for corporate accountability in relation to this conflict and in relation to other conflicts. Let me just begin with a general overview of the difficulties that we face, and then just to kind of then zoom in to see how corporations are actually very important within the specific conflict we're talking about. One of the primary problems in international law that doesn't allow us to have actual corporate accountability for war profiteering is the fact that international law does not not look at the corporation as a political actor. It's completely blind towards that. And that blindness is not something that is carved into stone. It is the result of corporate lobbying and the power of imperial states that have normalized this type of law. And states of the global south in the 1960s, 70s rose to the UN stage and asked for that to be changed, and asked for the recognition of corporate power in shaping our lives, and specifically where that's most prevalent is in shaping war economies. However, of course, that agenda was pushed down specifically by the Thatcher and Reagan regimes. And up until today, we still do not have an international legal framework with which we can actually recognize and hold corporations accountable for the amount of power that they exercise over the lives of people. And of course, that power is most prevalent in states of the global south, where big corporations have a very big negotiating power in relation to states of the global south that are kept in this race to the bottom in order to try to attract investors to come into their countries. So it's as if these corporations have so much power over our lives, and yet we do not have any tools with which to hold them accountable. And that has been one of the primary issues that my work has tried to deal with so far. If we look at the context of Palestine, we realize that one, the arms industry has made minimum of $40 billion profits ever since the start of the war. The mass military production related to that, and let's remember that Israel then uses any weapons that it has used in the context of Palestine, it uses that in marketing campaigns to then sell those same weapons to the world. Israel is one of the top producers of weapons all around the world. And then sadly, a good part of states of the global south and corrupt regimes end up buying these weapons. So we're looking at a deeply embedded structure of both impunity and profit. Another very important actor in the game is the oil and gas industry. After the start of the current onslaught in Gaza, Israel gave a green light to its investors in the oil and gas industry to tell them that don't worry, your investments are going to be okay. It is looking towards Gaza as a future space after the displacement of civilians, because we are looking at a lot of undiscovered profit that could come out of the shores of Gaza. However, we are looking towards the efforts by South Africa have made the capacity to litigate against corporations much more real than it ever was in relation to the context of Palestine. And now we've already seen a lot of movement specifically towards arms corporations in multiple jurisdictions in Europe and also in the US against corporations that are directly making profit out of the arms industry. However, we hope to take this further, because genocide is such a big crime that there is no discussion about corporations contributing to and benefiting to that major crime. So we owe to South Africa the thanks for helping us try to breach that huge blindness in international law in a greater effort to challenge those existing biases in international law. So as my colleagues have already tried to capture, we are at a moment of change. We are at a moment of re-establishing the premises of that, of the status quo in which we live, and challenging the existing structures of corporate impunity perhaps requires such an extreme case in order to help us flip the narrative the other way around. And you can see that happen in the immense amount of effort now going towards corporate accountability internationally. And hopefully 10 years from now, we will see these efforts taken further. And at least, if I may say, if I may end on one last note, yesterday there was a big dinner for arms dealers here in London, and there was a mass protest outside of it where people looked eye to eye with people who are making profit out of the arms industry. Those types of efforts are now gaining way much traction, and people are able to also link accountability, as you said, not just with the politicians, but also of the people making a lot of profit out of that. The next step is to for that type of representation to also be further materialized through the media, to also be looking at those CEOs who are sitting back and having dinner just to celebrate and drink cheers to the amount of profit that they made out of the death of people. We live in a world that normalized that. That should never be normalized. And we should always be very clear about the fact that this is not negotiable. No one should ever be profiting over the death of people.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shahd. And just like to welcome Donovan Williams. Donovan, I'm actually quite glad you've joined us for the last 15 minutes at the least, but I know you were at a Palestine solidarity meeting and you couldn't get out in time. But, we have been talking until now, looking at South Africa, the ICJ case, and looking at, the diplomatic implications for South Africa. Now, obviously, you've been very, very close to the international relations minister, the deputy minister as well. And you've obviously watched all of this unfolding very, very closely. And I just needed your thoughts on what does this actually mean for South Africa internationally on a diplomatic front?
Thank you, Inayat, and really my apologies. I was actually chairing the last session of the community meeting, so I couldn't get out. It would have been wrong. But this is all important work, and community activities are important. I think most importantly, and I want to put this message out, the South African government has done us proud. It's good to be South African. It really is good. We speak to friends and comrades and so forth in other parts of the world, some in Germany, some in Portugal, some in the UK and the United States, etc. And they wish they were South African because of the stance our government has taken at the ICJ. And we wish it could be just enough. That would be just enough. But unfortunately, and I think as our president has said yesterday and the day before that, brace yourself, South Africa. There are going to be consequences. There's going to be a backlash against South Africa in whichever way, politically, economically, and so forth. Because South Africa didn't just win against Israel in the ICJ. It won against the United States. You don't take on the United States and supposedly live to tell the day. Look around the world, look across the globe. So South Africans will be expected to stand by their government, because the backlash is going to come, and it's going to come hard over the next few months, especially because this is an election year, and we're going to feel it. You're going to feel it. There's already the threats of AGOA. You're going to feel it from apologists within our country, apologists for apartheid and apologists for genocide within our country, who speak on behalf of the West and in particular the United States. We're going to feel that. So I would ask your listeners in particular to brace themselves and to be strong and to stand. Secondly, we must call on our government and ourselves to get Africa riled up behind ourselves. It was embarrassing with what happened with the Ugandan judge. And as much as Uganda has said that they will not, they disassociate themselves from what the judge has done, but it is no coincidence that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken of the United States Secretary of State, took a so-called coastal tour of particular countries in Africa, and he did not include South Africa. It is not a coincidence. So we must help our country to be able to get Africa to rally behind it. Firstly, in the sub-region of SADC, and then in the African Union. And we need to put the pressure on by showing in the streets, continuing the solidarity activities, because in real terms, for the prosecuting of the judgment to occur, the preliminary judgment that has said Israel has to do ABC, we know since the judgment, more people have been killed, lots of them. And it means Israel has used the supposed allegations, or not supposed, the allegations made against the 8 to 13 staff, the numbers change, of the UNRWA, the United Nations Refugees Association for Palestine, has used that to ignore the humanitarian aid it's supposed to make. It's supposed to create a space for that. And we've had countries with the Israel say-so pull out of that. And these countries must be exposed. I mean, they're not countries just like the US and so forth, but they're countries like Finland. And countries where you think that no, these countries are good countries, that no, they are. It tells us clearly that this is racist. Black lives do not matter, and the lives in Palestine, they are black, just like us. And we need to make certain that this racism doesn't stand the test of time. So this is what I want to say very quickly, because we've got to, as South Africa, we can pat ourselves on the back, but we have to support. We have to do this. That law becomes the really good law when it is out in the streets and you live it. Germany cannot be allowed to arrest people for waving a Palestinian flag. How is that allowed in this day and age? So this is what I hope. This is the message I wanted to bring here, and this is what we need to take up. Taking through the judgment requires activism, comrades. It requires organizing, and it requires loud voices that are strong and are not scared scared of the backlash. Thank you, Inayat.
Well, thank you for that, Donovan, and I'm actually elated that you took the time out and even joined us for a few minutes. I see we've got about 8 minutes, and I'm going to go across to all the panelists, actually give you about 2 minutes each, just to get final thoughts, starting with you, Professor Rasigan.
So thanks very much, colleagues, and also Donovan for the points you've raised just now. I would argue, if you don't mind, Donovan, that we actually push the lever a bit further. It's not just the support of the South African government. It's the alignment between the peoples of South Africa, the peoples of Southern Africa, the peoples of Africa, with the global majority of the peoples of the world. And this is where we really need to be adding and mobilizing for. By using that example of the person who may have a passport that indicates their location, it in no way describes the condition between the person's ears. So I'm being quite clear about this. It's not identity politics. And it's quite important we don't fall into that trap as well. Being part of the global majority means we're standing on the basis of morality, of a better world that we want to contribute to building. And South Africa itself has a key role to play in that. With respect to the region, and like I said, the continent, remember, all of the peoples of the world originate here. So they are the ones that moved away from Africa. To that extent, we're also rekindling that form of solidarity. And it's absolutely important for all of us to advance on that basis. The points raised by the other colleagues, and it's important, even within South Africa, not to expect the institutions that have served to oppress us to also be the instruments through which our liberation is achieved. 30 years after democracy, we still have a long way to build. In the same way, we need to maybe accelerate that process, Donovan, democratization, legitimization, all of these things. And this is what this ruling South Africa's action has actually offered to us, not just the sanctions coming at us, but the positive sentiment that we need to mobilize around. And it gives us a huge opportunity to re-look at many things. In all of this, please, can we not be dissuaded from? We have to stand firm on stopping the violence. The ceasefire has to take place, and we need to push ahead beyond what any international or any institution of multilateralism says. This is a cause of humanity as well.
Thank you, Prof. Wesam, Ahmad, final thoughts from you?
Just to echo what the Prof has said, and Brother Donovan as well, and Dr. Shahd, the issue is bigger than us. It's the challenge we are facing is about the individualistic driving force that has led us down a path where the exploitation of people and the selling of this neoliberal imperial mindset that in order for you to enjoy things, they have to come at the expense of others. And I think this is the history of imperialism and the mindset that has driven it from the scramble for Africa to the scramble in the Middle East as well, that in order for the global North to enjoy its privileges, it has to come at the expense of the global South. And this awakening that I think is developing, an awakening of the consciousness of the global community, and seeing this trap of neoliberalism that has led us down this path, I hope that this will be an opportunity to push back against this and see humanity as a whole and the collective interest before the individual interest.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shahd.
So, if I may say, in the past few weeks, we've heard people chanting, "لو رحل صوتي ما بترحل حناجركم," which means that even if my voice is gone, your chants will remain. The people in Gaza have their voice taken away from them, and they're stuck in the most extreme space of ethical loneliness. The ethical loneliness in which they live in is an example or a simple ailment of the bigger problem that we have in the world. Another chant that we always hear in the streets is that in our thousands, in our millions, we're all Palestinians. And by that, they mean that the cause of Palestine is not something that is specific to the Palestinians, but again, it is something that connects us all, connects people who have known alien domination and subjugation. And that is the shared experience of the people of Palestine and the people of South Africa in its extreme sense, but also the peoples of the global South in its wider sense. So we must identify the things that bring us stronger together. This is a fight that comes in multiple layers. It is not only against the elite of our states that try to distort the image of where our interest lies, but also in the global elite of imperial powers that try to create a hyper reality and a distorted reality of how things should look like. What is happening now might have repercussions on the shorter term, and these repercussions are most felt by the Palestinian people. Our only hope that the heavy price that is being paid by the Palestinian people, or any price that might be paid on the short term by the people of South Africa for the brave decision taken by their government, is in and towards a larger act of liberation. That is our only hope forward, and if I may say, this hope is our fiercest weapon, not just for the people of Palestine, but for a world where this type of insanity is not acceptable, for a generation forward where we can revive the voices of the global South, and where we can say we have agency. We have agency to decide our fate, our self-determination, and also our economic spaces. And we refuse to be in a world where some people are seen as less than others.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Shahd. And I see Wesam Ahmad, Amandla Awetu. Wow. I've seen it in the chat box, yes, and I see Donovan echoing the Amandla as well. Donovan, since you joined us last, you can have the final word.
I don't think I will have the final word. This struggle, or Aluta continua, this struggle shall definitely continue. I think I'm going to say Rasigan, because this Prof, I know him for too long, that Rasigan is correct. It can't be government to government. And if that sentiment came across, it is about people to people. In the next couple of weeks, this Friday or the next Friday, we'll keep you posted. For example, we'll be cooperating with the Namibian people, not the Namibian government, the Namibian people, to take on the Goethe Institute and Germany about what they're doing. German institutions in our country, funding institutions, are telling the organizations, NGOs, that they won't give them funding if they raise their voices on Palestine. This is how the right wing works. And so this is why it is important that it's a people to people. Governments are restricted, people are not. And it is humanist. It's not identity politics, but it is racism. And we must discuss it. That's important, because racism is a global problem. And that's why it shows its face. So to the people of Palestine, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, to them, all we can say is we will not stop raising our voices. That's the least we can do. And if you are not doing that, then you've got to question your own humanity.
Well, thank you for that, Donovan, and also to you, Professor Rasigan Maharaj, Dr. Shahd, Hammouri, Wesam Ahmad as well, and to you, Donovan. We thank you, and we do appreciate you taking time out. And this discussion was most useful, a lot of value add, and having this esteemed panel right here on Salam Media, it's an absolute honor, and it's been a pleasure. To all of you, we wish you all the best. And once again, thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Salaam Michael.
Thank you.
Walaikum salam to all.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday nights here on Salam Media, another panel discussion, and once again, a power-packed lineup in terms of our panelists covering this all-important topic, looking at South Africa, the ICJ ruling, and also, more importantly, looking at South Africa and its standing on the global stage. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you until we meet again. From myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.